Welcome to the Muay Thai Nutrition Podcast. I'm your host, James Nicol. Today, we're going to talk about how to cut weight for a same-day weigh-in. Now, this is such a highly requested topic. I finally put aside some time to sit down and talk about it to you guys. Same-day weigh-ins is something that I've come across a lot, especially more recently with my clients, and specifically a lot of my North American clients. For some reason, tournaments and same-day weigh-in fights seem to be the way they do things over there. So it's something that, especially in recent years, I've had to work out how to deal with them best and work out the most effective strategies for making weight and then refueling to be able to fight your best fight for them. One thing to mention up front is that cutting weight in any capacity can be quite daunting, especially if it's you're relatively early in your career or it's one of your first times doing it. This is especially so if it's a same day weigh-in because you know you're going to have to perform a few hours later. It's not like a day before weigh-in when you can eat, drink, chill, go to sleep, wake up, and then focus on the fight. You go right from weighing in to pretty much going straight into fighting mode with very little transition time. So it can be quite stressful. One thing to mention up front is if you're about to have your first fight, or even if you have under 5 fights, what I would just say is probably don't bother cutting any weight. The minimal and debatable benefit you may or may not even get will likely be outweighed by the stress of cutting weight, especially if you're trying to do it on your own without a professional. This episode is for you if you're a little bit more experienced, if you need to make a specific weight class to actually have opponents. Some of my clients at their walk around weight, they don't have any opponents. They might have to cut to a slightly lower weight class to actually be able to get some opponents to fight. Or if you have fought before without cutting any weight and you felt a little bit undersized at your previous weight class. On that last point, managing body composition in the weeks and months leading up to the fight is going to be far, far, far more important for being a good size and strength matchup for your opponents than any weight cutting that you'll do over fight week for a same day weigh-in, because the weight cut over fight week is going to be so small. Making sure that you are in a position where you have a good strength and power to weight ratio, and contributing to that, you have your body composition, your body fat is within a suitable percentage range, is going to be much more important for being competitive with your opponents than any weight cuts. So anyway, with that said, let's jump right in. Let's firstly talk about how same day weigh-ins differ from day before weigh-ins. So pretty obviously, it's due to the shorter refuel window. So as opposed to a day before weigh-in, where you might have anywhere from 24 to maybe even up to 36 hours to refuel and rehydrate, for a same day weigh-in, you'll typically have anywhere from 0 up to maybe about even 12 hours to recover between the weigh-in and the fight. And even this is a wide range. So if you have 0 to 1 hours, you're pretty much going to be able to cut almost no weight. Whereas if you've got 12 hours, you could cut significantly more than that, potentially up to a maximum of about 5% of your body weight. So we've spoken about why it differs. Let's talk about how it differs from a day before weigh-in. So for a day before weigh-in, normally on the weigh-in day, you can focus on the aggressive refueling of carbohydrates. You can focus on rehydration so that most of the refueling needs are achieved before bed. And then you can wake up on fight day, focus around foods that make you feel good. Whereas on a same day weigh-in, we need to balance this refueling and rehydration with pre-fight fueling and making sure that you're not too bloated, we're not having any gastrointestinal discomfort. Because we don't have that luxury with a short refuel window, we need to be mindful of the amount of weight we're cutting and the foods and fluid we're consuming to refuel and rehydrate. Firstly, let's get out of the way things that we want to just flat out avoid with a same day weigh-in. There's two main things that we want to avoid. One is glycogen depletion, aka very low carb diets, because you're not going to have enough time to put those carbs back in after the weigh-in before the fight. You're still going to be depleted going into the fight. And number two is anything more than mild dehydration. So anything more than really 3% of your body weight is going to be very hard to replace between the weigh-in and the fight for a same day weigh-in. So those are two things we should flat out avoid. Completely cutting out the carbs and anything more than a very, very small amount of dehydration. So I've told you what you can't do. Let's talk about what methods are safe for a same day weigh-in. And I've said methods there, but it's more about the magnitude than the method itself. So firstly, let's cover the lowest risk methods. So the safest ones to use are going to be a low fiber diet, a low food weight or early timing of your final meal, and reduce sodium intake. So low fiber is pretty self-explanatory. Just reduce the fiber in your diet. This can help to reduce the amount of undigested food matter in your gut. If you have less food in your gut, you will weigh less overall. For the low food weight or early timing of your final meal, this is also related to gut content. So rather than, let's say you have a 200-gram chicken breast with 300 grams of rice and another 200 grams of vegetables for your meal. So the total weight of that meal is going to be much higher than if you were to have, for example, a protein bar or some rice cakes and peanut butter. So rather than going to bed with like a 700-gram meal in your stomach, you're going to bed with, I don't know, maybe 1 or 200 grams. So again, that's another method to reduce gut contents. And finally, reducing sodium intake. So sodium is one of the main electrolytes involved in regulating your total body water. So if you consume more sodium, you're going to hold on to more water. Therefore, the reverse, if you reduce your sodium intake, your body's going to release a little bit of water, and that will allow a small amount of water weight loss. So those are the 3 lowest risk methods. Moving on to moderate risk. So these are still things that can be implemented, but should be done after you've implemented the lowest risk ones, and should be done with a degree of caution as well. So we have water loading / restriction. So water loading just refers to drinking a little bit more in the days leading up to it, but the restriction is what is going to lead to the actual weight loss. So that would be rather than drinking as you normally would, perhaps in the evening before your weigh-in the following morning, you would just drink a little bit less water than you normally would. That would allow you to lose a little bit of water weight without having to, jump in the hot bath, jump in the sauna, put the sweatsuit on. So a small amount of water restriction. The second moderate risk method would be mild carb restriction. Again, not depletion. I've already clarified that we don't want to be doing depletion. We don't want to be dropping those carb stores to zero, but a mild amount of carb restriction could potentially be an effective method. Again, this is in the moderate risk class. So once you've done the low fiber, reduced sodium intake, and low food weight, this is potentially a method to allow a little bit more of extra weight. But you do want to ensure at least moderate carbohydrate intake. I would say 2 to 3 grams per kilogram per day as a minimum. To be honest, for my clients, I like to keep 3 grams per kilogram per day as a minimum. So let's use that 3 grams per kilogram as a rule. If you are 50 kilograms, then that would be at least 150 grams per day. If you're 70 kilograms, at least 210 grams per day. What that would do is that will ensure enough fuel in the tank for your fight without having excess carbohydrates that you're potentially not going to use if you're only fighting once in that day. So we've covered for moderate risk, water restriction, mild carb restriction, again, not depletion, and finally a small amount, emphasis on small, of active dehydration. So active dehydration is just exercise induced, and that could be maybe 1 to a maximum of really 2% of your body weight if we're going to quantify what I would class a small amount to be. So if you're 60 kilograms, then 1 to 2% of your body weight would be 0.6 to 1.2 kilos. See that as a maximum, a sort of last resort. If you've implemented all the methods above, you still have a little bit to lose, you could potentially do that. The high risk ones to avoid, as I've already mentioned, are glycogen depletion. So, for example, in a day before weigh-in, over fight week, a lot of people will go under 50 grams of carbs per day, which is completely fine for a day before weigh-in, where you have a long refuel window. Whereas for a same day weigh-in with a shorter refuel window, you're simply not going to have enough time to put those carbohydrates back in. So you're going to be depleted going into the fight. So you want to avoid glycogen depletion. And you also want to avoid sweating to lose 3% or more of your body weight, especially using methods like saunas and hot baths. Like I said, you could use a small amount of active dehydration, exercise induced. Again, maybe go for a little jog, put a couple of layers on, wear a beanie hat or whatever, put a tracksuit on. And that's going to allow you to lose 1 to 2% of your body weight relatively easily. Again, keep that as a maximum. 3% or more is not going to be appropriate for a same day weigh-in. So if you've listened to my other episode, episode 6, I believe, on how to cut weight over 5 weeks for a day before weighing, you'll know that the overall methods remain fairly similar. It's just a case of keeping the carbohydrate restriction and the fluid losses within a lower range due to the reduced recovery window. Let's talk about how much weight to cut. So if you have 0 to 2 hours between weighing in and fighting, then I would recommend cutting 0 to 2% of your body weight. If you have 2 to 4 hours, this could extend to 2 to 4% of your body weight. Anything beyond 4 hours, then 5% would be a maximum. So you can see there, a good sort of heuristic is that you can cut 1% of your body weight per hour of refuel you have. But the emphasis is that there's a cap on 5%. So if you have 4 to 5 hours, you cut 4 to 5%. But if you have 6, 7, 8 hours, 5% is still the maximum. So don't think that if you have a 12-hour refuel window, you can cut 12% of your body weight, because you certainly can't, for a same day weigh-in especially. So keep that maximum at 5%. To calculate what is X percent above your fight weight, take your fight weight, divide it by 100, and then times that number by 101 for 1% above, or times it by 102 for 2% above, etc., etc. So you can use that to work out your target weight at the beginning of fight week. Make sure you start at the lower end of the recommended range. Everyone responds differently, and I'll talk a little bit more about testing in a moment. It's important to find out what works for you. So let's talk about putting it together. We're going to use the example of a Friday morning weigh-in, a Friday evening fight. Let's say you've got 4 hours at least to refuel. So let's go for a 3% body weight cut. So in between that 2 to 4% recommended range. At the beginning of fight week, ensure you're still consuming a moderate amount of carbohydrates, especially around training sessions. Make sure you're drinking plenty of fluid throughout the day as well. We definitely don't want you being dehydrated, especially earlier in the week. 3 days out from the weigh-in, so for a Friday weigh-in, this would be from Tuesday, you want to reduce fiber and sodium. This means swapping whole grains for white versions, so like white bread, white pasta, white rice, instead of whole grain versions. This is going to reduce your fiber, allow you to reduce your gut contents, and a bit of essentially free weight loss that's not going to impact your performance. Also, at this point, stop adding salt. Not only salt, but also salty seasonings, salty sauces, condiments, things like soy sauce, oyster sauce. Pretty much every condiment is going to be quite high in salt or sodium. And you also want to avoid highly processed foods, because these are going to be high in sodium. So things like tinned or canned foods, especially junk foods, are going to be high in sodium. So try to avoid them. A combination of reduced fiber and reduced sodium intake should lead to about 2% of your body weight loss, about 1% from fiber reduction, assuming you've had a relatively high fiber diet prior, and about 1% from the sodium restriction. So if you were cutting 2%, you would be on weight already with no need to stress. In this example, we're going to aim for a 3% cut though. So on the final day prior to the weigh-ins, we're now on the Thursday, you've still got 1% to lose. So you could have a low weight or early timed final meal. So instead of chicken, rice, and veggies at 8 p.m., if you would normally have rice cakes with some peanut butter and a banana at 5 to 6 p.m. So not only is that meal going to be a few hours earlier, so you've got a longer fasting window, it's also going to be lower weight. So chicken, rice, and veggies, it's going to weigh more. There's more volume to that meal than something like rice cakes with a bit of peanut butter and a banana, or maybe a protein bar, something like that. It's going to weigh just 100 or 200 grams for that meal in total. So again, less food in your gut, less body weight on the scale. So that would be option A. Option B, you could just do a little jog in some extra layers. If you want to keep your meal timing and meal composition normal, you could just put on a tracksuit, put on a couple of extra layers, go for a jog around the block, and you probably lose half a kilo, maybe a kilo from doing that, depending on your body weight, to lose that final 1%. Or you could restrict a little bit of water in the evening. So rather than just drinking normally as you would right up until bed, after about dinner, you could maybe cut off the water, and that would allow a little bit of weight loss, because you would still be urinating, but you wouldn't be putting that fluid back in. So either of those methods, what I would say is don't do all of them, only do what is necessary. Any of those methods would allow the final 1% of the weight loss without having to go into any aggressive territory, any, extreme dehydration, extreme fasting, or extreme water restriction, keeping it very mild here. The key thing to mention is that everyone responds differently, so make sure you are testing ahead of time. A way to do this would be you could try a 3-day low fiber and low sodium test and record your weight loss over this period, and also be mindful of how you feel as well. So not only after doing this, you'll know how much weight you can expect to lose, you'll also know how these methods make you feel. So if going low fiber and low sodium for 3 days makes you feel awful, then you know it's probably not a good idea to do this in the lead up to the fight. However, if you can do that, then you can lose, for example, 1 or 2 kilos relatively easily. You still feel good. You know that you've got that 1 or 2 kilo buffer leading up to the fight. Let's talk now about the post weigh-in. So we've covered everything up to actually how much weight to cut and how to cut that weight. Let's talk about what to do after you've weighed in. So really here it's the same as for a day before weigh-in, which I've covered in detail in episode 3. The only distinction is it's going to be less food and less fluid because you've lost less weight over 5 weeks. So the replenishment requirements are lesser, basically. Simply focus on eating and drinking little and often, and try to stop a similar time that you would before a training session. So if you normally eat about 3 hours before a training session, eat about 3 hours before your fight. Same for fluid as well. If you normally drink right up until a training session, you'll probably be okay to drink right up to the fight, but keep it at just sips. Don't down loads of fluid right up to the fight, because it's gonna you're not gonna feel that great going into the fight. One thing to note is that you've not depleted carbohydrates, so any carbohydrate containing meals or snacks are going to serve just to top up your fuel stores post weigh-in. So it's going to be just a little bump on them rather than purposeful replenishment. Post weigh-in, it's more important to consume fluid, especially if you've used sodium restriction, water restriction, or any sweating to make the weight, because all of these methods are going to reduce your total body water. So rather than carbohydrates, our focus is adding in a little bit more fluid. Regarding what fluid to consume, you can buy an oral rehydration solution, or the rehydration drink recipe covered in episode 3 would be appropriate, assuming that you followed this advice and you've kept water losses to a minimum. You might only be able to have one meal or snack depending on how long a recovery window you have. So make sure you keep it high carb, because the carbohydrates are directly going to benefit your performance. You want to keep it low fat and low fiber, because fat and fiber slow down digestion. We don't want your digestion to be slow, because that will lead you to feel bloated and some sort of stomach discomfort in the fight, which obviously we don't want. So keep the fat and fiber relatively low, focus it on carbohydrates, and importantly, have this meal or snack as something you are familiar with. Ideally, your pre-sparring meal. We don't want to be introducing any new food at this point. A few options could be any sort of pasta, rice, or grain dishes. Fruits, especially ripe bananas. That includes dry fruits as well. Breakfast cereals, low-fat yogurts, white bread with honey or jam, or sort of energy bars or sports drinks would all be appropriate options at this point. So after you've weighed in, have a high carb snack or meal, depending on how long you've got. Drink plenty of fluid. Make sure you ensure that your urine is either pale yellow or clear to indicate that you're hydrated, and you'll be good to go for the fight. So in summary, the main consideration for a same-day weigh-in is the fact that you've got a reduced recovery window. This means that we are less aggressive with our fight week strategies. Low fiber, low sodium, and a low weight or early final meal. A small amount of water restriction and possibly active sweating are going to be the most appropriate methods. A good heuristic is that you can lose 1% of your body weight per hour of your recovery window, with a maximum cap on 5%. So any recovery window over 5 hours is still limited to a 5% cut for a same-day weigh-in. Make sure you set a target weight for the beginning of fight week based on this information. Test ahead of time. Don't leave it up to chance on fight week. Post weigh-in, we need to balance topping up fluid and fuel stores. So this requirement, we need to balance that with also giving you good energy for the fight. So ensure that you're well hydrated and you have a familiar, high carb, low fat, low fiber meal or snack on hand to set you up to fight your best fight. If you have any questions or requests for future topics or episodes, you can message me on Instagram at JamesNickelNutrition. head to my website, jamesnicholnutrition.com, for articles, podcasts, or to work with me one-to-one. That's it for today. Catch you in the next one.